She purchased maximum life insurance to ensure that you were all covered. She contributed the maximum amount to her 401. Kay intends to set aside money for your future. I'm not sure what else has transpired in her life, but everything appears like care to me. Thanks, Celia. I'll try to remember that when they stand up to depart. He looked at the table. Neither of them had touched their supper. I guess I'm not a good lunch option, he replied wryly. Don't worry about it, she said carelessly. Skipping a meal or two is certainly beneficial for me. Frank examined her slim form. She seems excellent to me, he thought. As they walked out the door, he reflected on how long it had been. She took his hand. Please remain in touch, Frank, and let me know if there is anything I can do to assist. I truly want to assist. Then she reached out to kiss his cheek as she turned away. Frank thought she blushed. Frank was surprised to see that his mood had improved once he returned home. I guess I needed to talk it out, he told himself. The following Saturday, Frank was in the yard, collecting limbs that had fallen during a thunderstorm. When he entered the house, he noticed Anna conversing on the phone. He turned to face Daniel, who was standing nearby. Did anyone call? Asked Frank. No, Daniel said dismissively. She's merely talking with her new best friend, Celia. Frank was astonished. Does she make a lot of calls to Celia? And what about the beef? Dad. Daniel reacted with sorrow. You're completely off the mark. BFF means best buddy forever. Anna looked up to see her father. If Daddy is available, we will take Celia out to dinner. Let me talk to her, he replied, extending his hand to his daughter as she handed him the phone. He said, Hello, Celia. I believe you overheard that. Do you want to have supper with Anna tonight? Daniel and I will be here as well. He heard her pleasant giggle, followed by a swift agreement. Very well, he replied. Why don't you come here around 6 o'clock? After they'd agreed, Frank hung up the phone and turned to his daughter. Well, here she comes, he remarked. I hope you're happy. Yes, Daddy, she squealed. In that case, you and Daniel should tidy up the place so she doesn't think we're living like pigs. Daddy, do I have to? Daniel complained. But before Frank could respond, the child turned and started gathering up the clothes he had left in the room. He's still an adolescent, Frank reasoned, but he seems to be improving. Frank turned to head for the kitchen and began to consider what cuisine he should prepare. He reasoned that there must be something greater than spaghetti and meatballs. He ultimately decided on the fish dish, which he considered one of his specialties, after recalling the first time Celia dined with him. He was confident he could do it, and the kids enjoyed it, which was always a positive. He was aware that he would need to go to the grocery store for this. After describing his mission to Daniel and Lori, he told them to stay inside the house until he returned. He got a lovely piece of fish in the seafood area before heading to the bakery for some dessert. I should get a good bottle of wine. He considered his options before directing his trolley to the suitable aisle. Once he had discovered what he was looking for, he went to the store's floral section and purchased a bouquet for the table. On the way home, he considered what he was doing. I'm actually binging on this food, he realized with surprise. He eventually felt that he owed Celia a decent meal. After all, I wrecked her meal, he told himself. Celia answered the doorbell at 6 p.m., and before Frank could answer, Anna was already welcoming her in, much to his surprise. Even Daniel showed in, and the teenager struck up a pleasant discussion. Frank felt awkward and inarticulate. Celia, on the other hand, made no indication that she observed it. Instead, she chatted cheerfully with Anna and eagerly accompanied her to see what the girl had to show Celia in her room. By the time they returned, dinner was practically ready. The meal was a huge success. Celia was highly impressed with his cooking abilities. A man who knows how to cook. Mother had told me about people like you, she taunted, as well as the fact that he seemed at ease with the kids, both of whom chattered away in response to her questions. When dessert was over, she insisted on participating in the cleanup, and with her assistance, the dishes were quickly stored, cleaned, and placed in the dishwasher to run later. At this point, Daniel excused himself to continue playing video games. He had paused, and Anna wanted to watch a favorite program that she had recorded, so the two grown-ups poured their glasses with wine and went out into the living room. Frank, it was fantastic. Celia complimented him. I'm not sure when I've had so much fun. Thank you so much for inviting me. I doubt Anna would ever talk to me again if I didn't. Frank laughed. Celia joined him. She's a beautiful girl, and you're lucky to have her, she said. Her father is also doing a really decent job. Frank's face flushed, but then Celia's face became more serious. Frank, aside from having a nice time with you, I'm delighted you invited me because I have some information I'd want to share. Frank noticed the altered inflection in her voice and stared at her with curiosity. This is extremely confidential, Frank, but I believe I know you well enough to trust you, and it affects you, at least indirectly. She had obviously captured his attention. As you are aware, Celia, the GBI was meant to perform a regular investigation for issuing your wife's death certificate. And as you know, we found no cause to reject to issue a duly issued certificate. She took a big breath before continuing. Naturally, we did the same with John Collier, but we discovered a few anomalies. First, it became clear that he was in financial problems as a result of a series of poor investment decisions. Frank nodded. What Celia stated mirrored what Amanda Collier told him. Furthermore, Celia has stated several times in recent weeks that she, as SI Security, has notified us that they have identified what appear to be substantial abnormalities in the Southeastern Accounting Department led by John Collier. Even more concerning, they believe they have discovered a fraudulent billing technique that may have resulted in the theft of millions of dollars from EMC, and John Collier appears to have approved it. Amanda Frank said that she did not deserve that. But when he considered what Celia had told him, more options emerged. Could John Collier have played a role in the disaster? He asked. Could that have been an attempt to disguise his tracks? When Celia said nothing, Frank's imagination went into overdrive. What if Meredith found out about the Collier scheme? What if he killed her to silence her and used the plane disaster to conceal evidence? Maybe he is still alive. Perhaps he is hiding off in a villa by the sea, laughing at all of us. Take your time, Frank, Celia urged. You're getting carried away. The most likely scenario is that the jet went down unexpectedly, as we had assumed all along. If Collier was truly involved in the embezzlement conspiracy, the crash derailed his ambitions. We will investigate all possibilities. However, we cannot jump to conclusions, and neither should you. But Frank had a difficult time turning off his imagination. You don't think Meredith was involved, do you? He asked aggressively. Celia sighed. It is not out of the question. She agreed, but we don't believe it is likely. For starters, if she was involved, it would imply that she had made a deliberate decision to abandon her family. It's unusual for a mother to abandon her children, especially those their age, she remarked, gesturing toward the children's chambers. Collier, on the other hand, had no children, and his wife claimed that their marriage was on the edge of dissolution at the time of his disappearance. Furthermore, unlike Collier, Meredith's funds were in perfect order, and she had made no indication that she was involved in any scheme previous to her disappearance, if there were one. In reality, her actions were diametrically opposed to those of someone who intended to disappear. But this is all just supposition. The only fact we have, Celia continued, is that Meredith's jet crashed into the sea. She hoped to reassure Frank, but as she looked at the man, she noticed he was still unhappy at her revelations. Frank, you have to promise me that you will not talk about any of this. It's highly confidential, and if that gets out, it may compromise our investigation. It might possibly lead to my dismissal. This made Frank tense. He recognized Celia had taken a risk by confiding in him, and he had to remain silent. I understand, Celia, and I will not jeopardize your inquiry, but I need to inquire. Why did you tell me all of this? She gazed at him. Seriously, it is doubtful, Frank, but there's always the possibility that you'll hear or learn anything that can assist us. Put some light on the situation. If you do, Frank, vow to get back to me immediately away. No, please, Lone Rangers. He met her gaze. I promise you, Celia. Then he smiled. Furthermore, if I have to deal with you again, it won't be such a chore. The smile she offered him seemed to brighten the whole room. Celia was soon forced to leave. Before leaving, she said her goodbyes to Bobby and Anna. Frank noticed that Daniel had halted his game to wish her goodbye, which was a genuine compliment from him. Anna led her buddy to the door again, stealing Celia's vow to phone her. This time, however, Anna hugged her. As she walked to her car, Celia made sure to lean against the door and kiss Frank on the cheek. Anna looked to her father and stated, "She likes you, Dad." Frank smiled at his daughter and pulled her closer to him. "Well, I like her too." After everyone had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Frank laid in his bed, reflecting on what Celia had told him and the various situations he had imagined. Mary, he was thinking, what did you get yourself into? He finally drifted into an uneasy slumber. A week later, Frank sat at his computer and saw something strange. He was reading about his favorite sports teams, and as he was about to click on the Falcons tab, he spotted a Facebook icon directly above it. He clicked on it impulsively. Frank was not a Facebook user. In fact, he hardly used the site at all. The only reason he had an account was to keep track of his kids. Daniel and Anna enjoyed the social networking site and utilized it to remain in touch with their pals. Frank didn't mind at first, but after reading a few alarming articles about some of the problems, he created his own account and insisted that Daniel and Anna add them as friends. He also asked them for the passwords to their pages. That way, he reasoned, I'd be able to see all of the messages and photographs they shared, as well as anything their friends sent them. More significantly, he hoped Daniel and Anna would understand that he could spy on them, which would urge them to be discreet. When he signed on to his page, the majority of what he saw bore him, but he did see a friend request from someone he had never heard of, Tom Thompson. The name appeared unknown to him, and there was no photo, only a silhouette. When Frank clicked on the name, the stranger's page just advised him that personal information was only available to friends. Hello, Daniel, he called out. Do we know someone named Tom Thompson? His son stepped into the room and noticed his father perusing Facebook. That dude. Simply ignore him, Dad. He's been convincing me to add him as a friend for weeks now. I just deleted his requests. At that point, did Anna enter the room? Yeah, he also tried to get me to friend him. He's just a creep on Facebook. It was enough to catch Frank's attention. Some unknown person wanted to contact both him and his children. Frank was aware that there were numerous scammers and far scarier predators out there. He was alarmed, but didn't want to terrify the kids. So he merely stated, you both did the right thing. He reassured them that they should never respond online to strangers. Well, as he looked for a means to defend his family, an unexpected thought occurred to him. Perhaps Celia can help us figure out who this creepy Thompson is. He called her home and she must have recognized his name from the caller ID since she responded cheerfully. Hello, Frank. Hello, Celia. I'm delighted I caught you. Is there any chance you could come over? Something unusual has come up and I'd like to see if you're available. It's nothing serious, right? Daniel and Anna are fine, right? Frank couldn't help but observe that she appeared to be just as concerned about his children as he was. It gave him a nice feeling. She informed him she was working in the yard but could drive up in 45 minutes. To Frank. Surprisingly, her automobile arrived at the curb practically simultaneously with Mary's. He remembered that he was lucky if she was only an hour late while striving to improve her image. But Celia arrived on schedule and evidently freshly washed, dressed in a casual yet appealing attire with nicely done hair and fresh makeup. Even in such a short period of time, she had clearly put in an effort. You look nice, Celia. You didn't need to dress up for us, he explained. She squeezed his hand. Thanks, Frank. I wanted it so desperately. When she arrived home, Frank summoned his children, who entered the room noisily. He requested them to inform Celia about their possible Facebook friend, Daniel. And as the family's official expert, he used the chance to brag. Quickly getting into each of the family's 3 Facebook accounts and receiving friend invitations from the mysterious Tom Thompson, who praised Daniel's talent. Celia sat in front of the screen and searched through all of the unread and archived messages, but she couldn't uncover any more information. She finally looked up at Daniel and Anna. The most likely explanation is some form of marketing trick. If you accepted the request, you'd undoubtedly get a slew of advertising for stuff you don't need or offers to buy fictitious gold from Nigeria. There are terrible individuals in this world, and you should never tell strangers about yourself. Okay, both children nodded seriously, and Frank realized that the message he had received from Celia had probably had a greater impact on them than when he had delivered it while they were working on their computers. It was growing dark outside, and Frank knew his children would be hungry soon. Celia is probably going out to dinner soon. It won't be fancy. Simply a family eatery. However, as Frank had expected, we would appreciate it if you could join us. Anna and Daniel both insisted on her joining them right away. She laughed and accepted the inevitable. The 4 of them jumped into Frank's vehicle and drove to a convenient location near their house. As they traveled, Celia started asking the kids about what she had seen on their Facebook accounts. Anna and Daniel quickly began conversing excitedly about their friends and activities. Frank listened to the exchange and pondered. Celia undoubtedly knows more about Anna and Daniel's lives than Mary did. He remembered the few times they had gone out together before she died. Meredith's interactions had primarily focused on her career. He felt horrible about his infidelity, but knew it was real. The spirited conversation continued through dinner and the trip home, and Frank was overjoyed when Celia entered the house with them. The children instantly sat in front of the television and invited Celia to join them, but she dismissed them. "I need to talk to your dad for a while." She took his hand and brought him to the living room. After they sat down, her expression went serious, and she continued, "I don't want to alarm Daniel and Anna, but I don't think those Facebook requests were a marketing ploy. The Bureau has received alerts about some identity theft scams, but they typically do not target children. Someone appears to be attempting to obtain information about your family on purpose." Frank's blood ran cold at the notion of his children being in danger. "Who might it be? What might they want?" She said, "I don't know, Frank. This is unlike any other cyber fraud model I have encountered. What can we do? Close their Facebook accounts. Perhaps keep kids off the internet altogether." She seems thoughtful. "I don't believe it's necessary, provided they avoid communicating with strangers, and if they receive gibberish emails with embedded websites, remind them not to click on the links." She paused for a few moments before speaking. "The internet's problem is its unstructured nature. You don't know who you're working with or where they are, but it's not as opaque as many people believe. I know someone in the federal government who might be able to help us. He will most likely be unable to determine Tom Thomason's identity, but he may be able to tell us where he lives. Let me call you on Monday and tell you what I find out about those words." When she returned, she got up and went to her room to say goodnight to her two children. Frank led her to the door, but before she opened it, he embraced her. "You've been like a guardian angel for us," he replied truly. "I'm not sure what we would have done without you." She peered into his eyes for a second before kissing him quickly on the lips. "I'm not sure if I want to be an angel," she admitted with a wink. "They do not have much fun." She immediately turned and hurried rapidly to her car, leaving Frank confused. Celia stuck to her word and called Frank late Monday morning. "Do you know someone from Palm Beach, Florida?" she asked. Frank said, "Not a soul. Whoever Tom Thomason is, he made his Facebook account using a zip code that begins with 334. So he is someplace in Palm Beach County," she said. "I can't comprehend why someone in Palm Beach would try to contact us," Frank explained, "but at least he isn't around. That is reassuring." "I agree," Celia stated. "Besides, we've been tracking a lot of scammers in South Florida, so maybe this is a new type of internet scam. Just make sure Daniel and Anna have nothing to do with the friend requests." "I will, Celia. Thank you. I feel so much better about the whole situation." I'm pleased I could assist Frank regardless of what he had said to Celia. Frank was not reassured. On the contrary, it appeared to him that he and his children were under constant attack. First came the devastating news of Meredith's death. Then poor Daniel admitted that his wife had cheated on him. Then he learned that Mary may have been involved in some dishonest business operations before her death. And now an unknown someone was attempting to obtain information about his children. Frank felt as if they were under siege, so he resolved to strike back. His first goal was to track down the opponent in Palm Beach County and face him. But how could he accomplish that? A quick internet search revealed that the county had a population of 1.3 million. Seeking for Tom Thompson is like seeking for a short stick in tall grass. Besides, Frank thought it was just as probable that the name was a fabrication. Frank's orderly intellect continued to beat over the problem. Then an idea hit him. If I can't find Thomas, maybe he'll find me. A plan began to emerge in his head. The possibilities are slim, he acknowledged, but this is all I have. The first thing he needed to do was remove Daniel and Anna from the situation. It was almost time for summer vacation, which gave Frank an idea. He dialed his in-laws' telephone. "Dad, would you and Mom like Daniel and Anna to come see us for a week? I will need to leave town during that time, so you'd be a great help." When the children's grandfather joyfully consented, all difficulties about their stay were settled. Frank hung up the phone and promptly contacted Delta. I want to book a flight to Palm Beach. His children were overjoyed to learn of their upcoming visit with their grandparents. Their enthusiasm dimmed when they discovered that their father would not be with them. This would be their first separation since their mother's death, and the thought rekindled the anxiety of abandonment they had experienced since then. Frank hated causing the children any distress, but he felt compelled to carry out his plan, and he was successful in convincing them. Frank started having misgivings around a week before their visit. Am I doing the correct thing? He questioned himself. Despite the uncertainty, the idea of doing nothing was worse. His inner anguish was briefly interrupted by a phone call from Celia, who wanted to know how he and his family were doing. After a few minutes of talking, the tone of her voice altered somewhat, and Frank noticed she sounded almost shy. I was wondering if you would like to meet together next week. I haven't seen you or the kids in a while, and her voice trailed off uncertainly. I would love to do that, Celia, but then I'll take the kids to their grandparents. We will be gone all week, she said. I understand. Maybe another time. That would be extremely nice, Celia, he spoke earnestly. Frank felt horrible for lying to Celia about his goals, but he convinced himself it was at least somewhat genuine. Furthermore, he was confident he knew what she would say if he confessed his genuine intentions. When Frank got home and took the children to see his relatives in the village, he sat down at the family computer. One of the reasons he asked Meredith's family to take his children was because he knew they didn't have a computer, so he felt comfortable entering onto Lori's Facebook. Sure enough, Tom Thompson sent me a friendship request. Frank hit the accept button and shortly received confirmation that Anna had become friends with the stranger. If nothing comes of this, Frank reasoned, I'll simply unsubscribe from him later. Next came the most difficult part, appearing to be a 12-year-old girl. He reviewed his daughter's prior texts and concluded that he could emulate her style fairly effectively. I might not be able to fool her friends, he thought to himself, but I hope I can fool Tom Thompson. He decided that his first communication should build the groundwork and sent a brief letter about his visit to the country. Frank assumed Anna had a little news for her friends, nothing to raise the suspicions of the lurkers. The next day, he intended to set a trap. OMG, I am heading to Florida. My best friend Celia offered to take me with her, and my father consented. Are you planning to fly off tomorrow? Cannot wait. Frank chose to address Celia by her first name because it appeared that neither Lori's friends nor Tom Thompson knew her. He hoped Celia didn't mind that the bait was in the water. Frank wanted to wiggle it enough to attract the fish's attention. I cannot believe I am in Palm Beach. That is to die for. In the evening, Frank published the following piece. We spent the day at the beach. Frank put a note. I'm going to be so tan the next morning, hoping it would catch on. I'm heading back to the beach tonight. Tomorrow, Celia will take me shopping on 4th Avenue. We will eat lunch at Taboo's, Kukui'ula. As soon as the entry appeared on Anna's page, Frank drove to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Soon, he had already settled into a seat for the 2-hour journey to Palm Beach. Looking out the window, he remembered having been to Palm Beach once before. In fact, he and Mary had passed through town on their way home from their honeymoon in Miami Beach. They had driven across the Lake Worth Bridge and then down Southern Ocean Boulevard, admiring the mansions that overlook the Atlantic. After landing, Frank rented a car and drove to the motel in West Palm Beach where he had booked a room. He went across the street to a fast food restaurant and got a sandwich and a Coke, which he ate in his room while studying a city map on his computer. He hoped he was doing the correct thing. After breakfast, he checked Lori's Facebook page, but found only a few envious replies from her classmates. He didn't expect Thomas to contact him, but he hoped his fishing expedition might find something. Around 10 a.m. he got in his car and drove east over the Royal Park Bridge, turned south, and then east again to Worth Avenue. He wanted to be there early, and he needed to park the car on the street so he could get there quickly if necessary. After driving around the block where the restaurant was several times, he was beginning to wonder if he had miscalculated. But suddenly a car pulled out in front of him, and he was able to pull into the parking space. Setting the meter down, he walked down the street in front of the restaurant, noticing a bench in the shade. He gratefully took a seat on it. He grabbed his baseball cap and sunglasses and put them on, hoping to disguise himself. Then he pulled out a copy of the Palm Beach Post and pretended to read while looking around the street. As he sat there, the realization of how flimsy his plan was slowly began to set in. He had no idea if the mysterious Tom Thompson had seen the fake posts on Lori's Facebook page and would show up in response. Worse, Frank had no idea who he was looking for unless the mystery man turned out to be John Collier, which Frank thought was unlikely. How would he be able to recognize the threat? All he could hope for was to spot the suspicious man, whatever that meant, and come face to face with him. The street was crowded and Frank kept trying to keep track of all the passers-by. The restaurant was starting to fill up and his stomach rumbled as he watched the people coming in. He cursed himself for not thinking to bring a sandwich, but he didn't dare leave his post. Time stretched slowly as he sat there, and after a while he saw the crowd in the restaurant begin to thin. Glancing at his watch, he realized it was over an hour later. What an idiot, he thought. I wouldn't be any worse off if I stayed home, and at least I could see Celia again. While he was looking at the shoppers passing by, a woman strolling across the street caught his eye. Here I go again, Frank thought, seeing Mary in a crowd of strangers. In fact, he noted, the woman looked nothing like Meredith at all. Meredith had shoulder-length brunette hair, and this woman was a blonde with a short haircut, and her clothes were different from anything Frank had ever seen Meredith wear. But there was something eerily familiar about her. And as he continued to watch her, Frank realized that it was her gait that had triggered his reaction. He impulsively got up and followed her, glancing down the street. He saw that the blonde had reached the corner and was trying to hail a cab, risking his life. Frank ran across Worth Avenue and jumped into the car just as he pulled away from He saw the woman climb into the back seat of the cab and race down the avenue toward the Atlantic before reaching Southern Ocean Boulevard. The cab turned left onto County Road and headed north. Frank followed it for some distance. Finally, he saw that the cab turned left onto a suburban street and kept going until it got almost to Lake Worth. Frank stopped the car at the curb about a soccer field away and watched as the woman paid the driver and then entered an elegant house that faced the lake. Frank squinted his eyes, trying to get a good look at her with her hair color and shortcut. She looked nothing like Mary, but she was the same height and weight, and as she walked down the path toward the house, Frank was again amazed at her gait sitting in the car. Frank suddenly remembered a book he had read a long time ago. In the story, an actor needed a disguise, but instead of a false mustache or wig, he just put pebbles in his shoes. If someone sees me, the actor told his friend, they'll say, looks like that guy, but it's not him because I'll walk differently. It works the other way too, thought Frank as he recalled the book. The certainty grew in him that he had just seen his deceased wife trying to hold back his growing anger. He ran down the street and walked to the door. He rang the doorbell and crossed his arms and waited. Opening the door, the woman looked at him with a perplexed look. Then she did a double take and shrieked, "Frank, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Mary. Funny to meet you here," he said sarcastically. After a moment's hesitation, she spread her arms to hug him, but he quickly raised his hands to stop her. "Don't touch me," he growled. Then, unable to contain his anger any longer, he shouted, "How could you do this to me? How could you leave Daniel and Anna?" throwing an anxious glance outside. Meredith grabbed his arm and dragged him into the house, slamming the door behind her. "I did it all for you, baby. For you and the kids," she urged. "You have to believe me." It was the only way out as she spoke. Every now and then she looked around nervously. "What the hell are you talking about?" demanded Frank hotly. "You're missing the point. None of this makes any sense." "Sit down, little one," she coaxed him. "You have to let me explain everything." She was still speaking loudly and rubbed her hands together nervously, sitting down and urging him on. When Frank sat down, an icy calm descended upon him. "Okay, Mary, I'm listening. I was so close to it, baby. I had a coveted big job in my pocket. But then the damn economy went down. I knew if I could get a little more bang for the buck in the region, the economy would recover and the promotion would be secured." She smiled pleadingly and held out her palms to her husband and Frank. "Once I got this job, we'd be on easy street. No worries about paying for college for the kids. No worries about retirement. No worries ever again." Frank could barely contain himself. Was it all about money and Mary's position in the company? Meredith's hands rested on her lap again. "So John and I," John Collier said Frank grimly. "Yes," she continued, not catching his mood. "You've met him. Anyway, he and I figured out a way to move a few sales from our biggest accounts." We knew they'd show up eventually. We booked them earlier in the current quarter. Every other region was reporting a significant decrease in sales, and we had a significant increase. The corporation was just thrilled. We earned the biggest bonuses the company has ever paid, she says proudly. Then the smile slid off her face like a cloth falling to the floor. But the economy was getting worse, not better. And when John told me it would all come out eventually, I knew we had to do something about it. We knew we'd need a lot of money to pull this thing off. So John created a dummy vendor account and started sending fake invoices to EMC. They're so sloppy and wasteful over there, they didn't even notice. So you were planning to fake your death in a plane crash to cover your tracks? Asked Frank. That's right, kid, she said, as if Frank was her star pupil. With enough money, it's not hard to get someone to leave a Zodiac motorboat with a GPS signal in the Caribbean. We just homed in on the signal and landed right next to it. So this whole thing was just a way to steal a lot of money and abandon the family? Asked John bitterly. No, she protested. That's not it at all. I knew I'd have to get out of sight for a while, but I made sure you and the kids were okay. I took out life insurance and put everything I could into my 401. Okay, so you guys would have plenty of money, she said proudly. And you thought having enough money would make up for the loss of my wife and the mother of our children? This time she heard his bitterness. No, baby, no, you don't understand. I was going to come back for you as soon as things settled down. Was going to contact you. We could go somewhere safe, baby. We could be together. As she spoke, her eyes continued to dart around the room, Frank at her with a stony stare. You're only missing one thing, he said in an even voice. What is it, baby? She asked. You forgot about having fun with John Collier, he said. She was scared at first, but then she stood up and held out her arms to him. No, baby, it wasn't like that. John and I just worked together. We were never more than co-workers. Don't lie to me, Meredith, Frank snapped back. Daniel, you two together in our bedroom? She sighed. God, did Daniel see us? That's awful. A sob caught in her throat, but then she came to her senses and straightened up again. It was just one time, baby. He said he wouldn't help me unless I gave myself to him. But it was just one time, I swear. Frank stood up, ignoring her. He looked around. Come out, John, he said loudly. I know you're out here somewhere. Meredith continued to wail. No, baby, it's just me. It was just one time. But no sooner had she continued than John Collier appeared from the bedroom. He was wearing a robe and had his hands in his pockets. Lay off, Mary. He knows, Collier muttered, though he guessed. They live together here. Collier used his wife's favorite name, made Frank wince. Meredith began to cry. He must have found us through Facebook, Collier grumbled. I warned you, but you just had to check your two offspring. Then his tone changed to cold and hard. But that doesn't matter now. We need to get out of here. He turned to Frank and pulled an automatic rifle from his robe pocket, which he pointed in Frank's direction. As for you, bright boy, you're the only one who knows we're still alive. No, John, no, screamed Meredith. But Collier ignored her. Looks like your kids are going to lose not only their daddy, but their mommy too, he said with a chuckle, raising his gun at Frank. I wouldn't do that if I were you, came a voice from the hallway. All three turned around in amazement and saw the figure of Celia Murray appear in front of them, holding a Smith & Wesson automatic at Collier's throat. Before Collier could react, a second voice came from behind him. Drop the gun, Collier. It is over. Special Agent Harold Barnes emerged from the kitchen. His gun also pointed at Collier. The former head of the accounting department looked at the two agents hostilely, but then his shoulders slumped. But then the damn economy went down. I knew if I could get a little more bang for the buck in the region, the economy would recover and the promotion would be secured. She smiled pleadingly and held out her palms to her husband and Frank. Once I got this job, we'd be on easy street. No worries about paying for college for the kids. No worries about retirement. No worries ever again. Frank could barely contain himself. Was it all about money and Mary's position in the company? Meredith's hands rested on her lap again. So John and I, John Collier said Frank grimly. Yes, she continued, not catching his mood. You've met him. Anyway, he and I figured out a way to move a few sales from our biggest accounts. We knew they'd show up eventually. We booked them earlier in the current quarter. Every other region was reporting a significant decrease in sales, and we had a significant increase. The corporation was just thrilled. We earned the biggest bonuses the company has ever paid, she says proudly. Then the smile slid off her face like a cloth falling to the floor. But the economy was getting worse, not better. And when John told me it would all come out eventually, I knew we had to do something about it. We knew we'd need a lot of money to pull this thing off. So John created a dummy vendor account and started sending fake invoices to EMC. They're so sloppy and wasteful over there, they didn't even notice. So you were planning to fake your death in a plane crash to cover your tracks? Asked Frank. That's right, kid, she said, as if Frank was her star pupil. With enough money, it's not hard to get someone to leave a Zodiac motorboat with a GPS signal in the Caribbean. We just homed in on the signal and landed right next to it. So this whole thing was just a way to steal a lot of money and abandon the family? Asked John bitterly. No, she protested. That's not it at all. I knew I'd have to get out of sight for a while, but I made sure you and the kids were okay. I took out life insurance and put everything I could into my 401. Okay, so you guys would have plenty of money? She said proudly. And you thought having enough money would make up for the loss of my wife and the mother of our children? This time she heard his bitterness. No, baby, no, you don't understand. I was going to come back for you as soon as things settled down.